During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a confrontation that many historians consider the most dangerous period in human history. After the end of World War II in 1945, the former Allies quickly became geopolitical rivals, and the world effectively split into two blocks: the capitalist West, led by the United States, and the socialist camp, led by the USSR. For the first time in history, a conflict between nations had the potential not merely to change borders, but to destroy millions of lives within hours. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb at the Semipalatinsk test site. This event marked a turning point, as America's nuclear monopoly came to an end. A massive arms race began, with both nations rapidly expanding the size and power of their nuclear arsenals. By the early 1960s, the superpowers possessed thousands of nuclear warheads ready for deployment. An even more alarming development was the emergence of intercontinental ballistic missiles. In 1957, the Soviet Union tested the R-7. The world's first ICBM. Distance between continents was no longer a safeguard. Missiles could deliver nuclear warheads across oceans in roughly 30 minutes, fundamentally changing the concept of warfare and the possibility of civilian survival. Military strategies in both countries increasingly revolved around scenarios of global nuclear conflict. In the United States, plans were developed under the leadership of Strategic Air Command generals, including General Curtis LeMay. In the Soviet Union, comparable strategies were created by the General Staff under military leaders such as Marshal Georgy Zhukov and later Marshal Andrei Grechko. Planning became increasingly detailed, technical, and systematic. Gradually, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, known as MAD, took shape. Its logic was simple and terrifying. Any nuclear strike would inevitably trigger a retaliatory strike, resulting in the destruction of both sides. Paradoxically, it was this very fear of total annihilation that became the primary factor preventing war and maintaining a fragile peace between the superpowers. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the declassification of certain documents, it became clear that Soviet military plans included detailed target lists across the United States. These lists were updated throughout the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. They included not only military installations, but also major American cities, with political, economic, and industrial significance. Washington, D.C. was considered the primary political target, since it housed the national leadership and military command. New York City was viewed as the key financial target and a symbol of American economic power. Chicago appeared on target lists as a critical industrial and transportation hub, while Detroit was included as the center of the automotive industry, which could rapidly convert to military production during wartime. On the West Coast, Los Angeles and San Diego were considered priority targets because of their naval bases and defense industries. The San Francisco Bay Area also appeared among potential targets. The planning logic was cold and pragmatic. Destroy the enemy's command structure, economy, and military capacity within the first hours of war. Special attention was given to American military infrastructure. The primary objective was to eliminate the U.S. nuclear strike capability before it could be used in retaliation. For that reason, Strategic Air Command bases became top priority targets. One of the most important was Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, which housed the headquarters of Strategic Air Command itself. missile silos located in Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Colorado, where Minuteman intercontinental missiles were deployed, were also key targets. These regions could have been subjected to multiple nuclear strikes in order to guarantee destruction of the silos, even in the event of technical failures or partial interception. According to documents released by the U.S. National Archives in 2015, American war plans from the early 1960s called for thousands of nuclear strikes against targets in the Soviet Union, China, and Eastern Europe. Historians believe Soviet plans were comparable in scale, meaning a full-scale conflict would have resulted in near-certain mutual devastation. The most dangerous moment of the Cold War came during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev deployed nuclear missiles to Cuba, while U.S. President John F. Kennedy announced a naval blockade of the island. The world stood on the brink of nuclear war, and the probability of global catastrophe during those days was extraordinarily high. On October 27, 1962, one of the most dramatic incidents occurred aboard the Soviet submarine B-59. Officer Vasily Arkhipov refused to consent to the launch of a nuclear torpedo, a decision many historians believe may have prevented the outbreak of nuclear war. The episode illustrates how the fate of the world sometimes depended on the judgment of a single individual. Another dangerous incident took place on September 26, 1983, when a Soviet early warning system mistakenly detected what appeared to be incoming American missiles. Duty officer Stanislav Petrov chose not to report the alert to higher command, judging it to be a false alarm. He was later proven correct, as the signal resulted from a technical malfunction. The Cold War ultimately ended without global catastrophe, particularly after arms reduction agreements between Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. However, declassified documents revealed just how close the world had come to destruction. Major American cities, Washington, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Detroit, and others, remained on nuclear target lists for decades. In the end, the only thing that saved humanity was that neither side ever pressed the launch button. Even though the Cold War officially ended more than 3 decades ago, its legacy has never truly disappeared. Thousands of nuclear weapons still exist today, many of them on high alert, capable of launching within minutes. The systems created during that era, early warning networks, command protocols, deterrence doctrines, continue to shape global security in the modern world. For decades, humanity lived under the constant shadow of annihilation. Entire generations grew up knowing that somewhere, deep underground or hidden beneath the ocean, weapons existed that could end civilization in less than an hour. And yet, life continued. People went to work, fell in love, raised families, and planned futures, all while unknowingly living on the edge of possible catastrophe. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Cold War is not how close the world came to destruction, but how often disaster was avoided. History reveals multiple moments when misunderstandings, technical failures, or human fear could have triggered nuclear war. False alarms were detected, radar systems malfunctioned, military exercises were misinterpreted as real attacks. Each time, the world was saved by restraint, hesitation, or the judgment of individuals who chose not to escalate. This raises a profound question. Was humanity protected by strategy or by luck? Many historians believe it was a combination of both. Nuclear deterrence created a balance of terror that discouraged leaders from taking irreversible steps. But human decisions were equally critical. Individuals like Vasily Arkhipov and Stanislav Petrov demonstrated that even within rigid military systems, personal judgment could alter the course of history. Their choices remind us that global events are sometimes shaped by ordinary people placed in extraordinary situations. The Cold War also changed how humanity thinks about war itself. Before the nuclear age, conflicts were often seen as tragic but limited events. After Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and decades of superpower rivalry, war between major powers came to mean something entirely different: the possible end of civilization. This realization influenced diplomacy, international treaties, and public consciousness around the world. Today, many younger generations view the Cold War as distant history, something confined to textbooks and documentaries. But the reality is more complex. The weapons remain, the technology has advanced, and geopolitical tensions between nuclear-armed nations still exist. The lessons of the Cold War are not relics of the past. They are warnings for the future. Perhaps the most important lesson is the fragility of peace. Stability between nuclear powers was never guaranteed. It depended on communication, rational leadership, and sometimes sheer luck. The fact that humanity survived the Cold War does not mean survival was inevitable. It means catastrophe was avoided repeatedly, often by margins thinner than anyone realized at the time. When we look back at those decades, it becomes clear that the world lived through an unprecedented experiment. Two rival superpowers armed with civilization-ending weapons confronting each other for nearly half a century without direct war. It was a dangerous balance, sustained by fear, calculation, and diplomacy. In the end, the Cold War did not conclude with nuclear fire, but with political change. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the reforms of Mikhail Gorbachev, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 transformed the global order. What had once seemed like an eternal standoff suddenly came to an end. But the story does not end there, because the true legacy of the Cold War is not only the weapons that remain, but the knowledge humanity gained, the understanding that our survival may depend not on power alone, but on restraint, cooperation, and the willingness to step back from the brink.